You remember things other people forget. Not just the obvious things. Not the relationship. Not the kiss. Not even the person. You remember the conversation that lasted until 2 a.m. The sentence they said when they finally stopped pretending. The way they looked at you when nobody else was watching. The moment you realized quietly that you trusted them. And years later you can still feel it. That is where demisexual attachment can become psychologically complicated. Because when attraction is deeply connected to emotional intimacy, losing a person does not always mean losing a relationship. Sometimes you lose an entire emotional world, and your mind keeps visiting it. Demisexuality is often described through the absence of immediate sexual attraction. But that description misses the darker psychological reality for some demisexual people. When attraction finally appears, it may arrive carrying history, trust, vulnerability, and emotional meaning. So when the connection disappears, the attraction does not necessarily disappear with it. The memory can become the place where the relationship continues, quietly, long after reality has moved on. You may stop talking to them, stop checking their profile, stop imagining a future together, and still one tiny memory can reactivate everything. A song, a location, a particular sentence, the smell of a room, a message you never deleted. Suddenly, your nervous system remembers what your conscious mind had already decided to forget. This creates a strange contradiction. You can know someone is no longer right for you while still feeling emotionally attached to who you were with them. That distinction matters, because sometimes you are not attached to the person anymore. You are attached to the version of yourself that existed around them. That emotional state becomes precious. And the brain is very good at protecting precious things. It stores emotionally significant experiences with unusual intensity. Not because you are weak. Not because you are incapable of moving forward. Because emotionally meaningful memories become reference points. They tell you, this is what closeness felt like. And once your mind has experienced that depth, casual connection can start feeling strangely empty. This is where modern dating becomes brutal. Dating apps reward speed. Swipe, match, message, flirt, meet, disappear. The entire system encourages rapid emotional assessment before emotional familiarity has had time to develop. For someone whose attraction depends heavily on genuine connection, that can create an exhausting mismatch. You may be surrounded by possibilities while feeling almost nothing. Then one person breaks through. Not because they were objectively perfect. Because something happened. A conversation became unusually honest. You laughed without monitoring yourself. You revealed something you normally hide. They remembered a detail nobody else remembered. And suddenly, emotional significance appears. That is when attachment can become dangerous. Because scarcity increases value. When meaningful attraction happens rarely, the mind may treat it like evidence of destiny. The connection felt unusual. So your brain whispers, it must have meant something. Maybe it did. But meaning and permanence are not the same thing. That is one of the hardest truths to accept. A connection can be real and still be temporary. A person can change you without belonging in your future. And yet memory has no expiration date. This is where emotional nostalgia becomes more than nostalgia. You start editing the past. Not consciously. You remember the warmth more vividly than the confusion. The intimacy more than the incompatibility. The late-night honesty more than the moments you felt uncertain. Your mind turns a complicated relationship into a concentrated emotional artifact, perfectly preserved. And because the memory contains no new disappointment, it can become safer than real intimacy. Real people change. Memories don't. Real relationships demand negotiation. Memories demand nothing. That makes the past incredibly seductive. You can revisit the moment without risking rejection. You can experience closeness without vulnerability. You can feel the emotional intensity without discovering whether the relationship would actually survive ordinary life. And this is where some demisexual people can become emotionally attached to memories instead of possibilities. Not because they want to live in the past, because the past contains proof. Proof that they can feel deeply. Proof that attraction is possible. Proof that someone once reached a part of them that usually stays protected. That proof can become addictive, especially after another connection fails. You compare. Not necessarily people. Feelings. You ask yourself why this new person does not create the same emotional reaction. Why doesn't their attention feel like that? Why doesn't their touch mean the same thing? Why can't I just feel something? And without realizing it, you start measuring every new connection against an old emotional fingerprint. That is an impossible competition. The new person is being compared to a memory. Memories have been edited by time. They do not interrupt you. They do not misunderstand you. They do not disappoint you tomorrow. They simply remain exactly where you left them. You begin protecting yourself before intimacy has even developed. You are trying to prevent the next emotional loss before it exists. That is exhausting. And eventually, some people start shape-shifting. They become easier to love, less complicated, less needy, less expressive, less honest about what they want. They edit themselves because they remember what it felt like to finally be accepted. They want to recreate that safety. But emotional safety cannot be manufactured through self-erasure. And neither can attraction. You cannot force yourself to want someone because they are available. You cannot erase a meaningful memory by replacing the person. And you cannot recreate an old connection by finding someone who resembles its surface. Because what you miss may not be the person. It may be the emotional permission you had around them. The permission to stop performing. The permission to be complicated. The permission to want slowly. The permission to feel without immediately explaining why. And maybe that is the hidden psychology nobody talks about. Sometimes the memory survives because it represents the last time you felt emotionally unguarded. That is why letting go can feel like erasing evidence that you were once understood. But you are not required to destroy the memory. You only have to stop using it as a measuring device. Because the next meaningful connection will probably not feel identical. It should not. Different person. Different history, different version of you. And perhaps the most dangerous mistake is believing that because the first deep connection was rare, it was your only chance. It wasn't. Rare does not mean singular, and meaningful does not mean finished. The memory can remain. The question is whether you remain inside it. Because sometimes healing is not forgetting the person. It is finally allowing the future to become emotionally real enough that the past no longer has to carry all your proof of being loved. And maybe that is the final truth. You were never attached only to a memory. You were attached to the feeling that memory proved was possible. And once you understand that, something changes. Quietly, you stop chasing the past. You stop demanding that the future feel familiar. And for the first time, you become available to a connection you have never experienced before.